Hello, everybody. Welcome to my LinkedIn event. Today, I'm going to talk about building an effective enterprise architecture team in 90 days or less. So, again, why don't we get started? So, here a little bit about me. Again, I'm This is going to be my only advertising page. So, I was a consultant. I was also a consultant for a very large software vendor, and then worked in industry about 50-50 each one of those. And in industry, I've often had architecture teams. In my last job, I was the chief architect of a Fortune 100 company, Fortune 100 global company. Now I'm an independent consultant and enjoying to share what I've learned throughout my career with my clients. So that's it about me. And why don't we talk about what we'll cover today? So again, it is about how to effectively put an enterprise architecture team together. It doesn't have to take that long. And the big secret why, I think, or I don't know if it's a big secret, secret why is that you already have the people. Architecture teams, effective enterprise architecture teams, need to be experienced people from your organization. Now, if really you didn't have any, that would be a shame. But then it would definitely take longer because building people that are effective enterprise architects does take a while. So in most cases, you already have these people in your organization, and then you just need to assemble them. So if you get the operating model right and all these things right, you should be able to get an effective team going pretty quickly. So that's why I have no doubt this can be done in 90 days, unless that exception of you really don't have much talent in your organization, which is unusual. I find that very rarely. So in this workshop, I will cover how I've done this before in really reforming my last role. I really restructured my enterprise architecture team to be a lot more business focused than technology focused. So and was able to do that relatively quickly. So what I'll talk about is 3 building blocks of an effective EA team, key components of an EA operating model, and then how to use the EA scoping tool really to figure out what scope the EA team should work on. And that's actually what we'll go into in the most detail, and I'll probably cover some of the other key components just briefly, but how the scoping tool works, and it's an important process to define, because if you don't know your scope and you don't know exactly how you will operate, I'm not sure how you put an effective team together. How do you know how many people you need? How do you know what kind of people you need? So those are the building blocks that we'll talk about, and scope of work is the one we'll go into detail. So without further ado, here on the scoping side, on the building an effective operating model. So at the end of the day, the idea is, let me get my pen out here. So you want effective EA team is what you want to get, right? So what do you need to decide? What do you need? And I think the important parts are scope. Again, we'll get into the detail of that. And by scope, I mean the business areas, processes that and business capabilities that the enterprise architecture team will get engaged in. Then there's the operating model. So what are the work processes, the services you offer, and so on. And then there's the org and the people, and I'll get into that the least. I probably won't have time for that. We can cover that in some other time. But that's actually pretty simple. Once you know the scope and your operating model, how you assemble the people to get the job done is actually relatively easy. So then let's dive a little bit deeper on scope. So what does scope entail? So there's I'd say the company priorities you need to know. You want to work on business capabilities that are important to your company. So you need to understand what's important to your company. You need to know your company structure. Not just for scope. For scope, you kind of need to know, there might be certain divisions you won't be you won't be working with, or that aren't as primary, or if you have very independent entities, I might have to, the processes across each might be very different, and I might need more people because they're so different. I can't expect one person to know the difference across all these different operating entities within your company that also don't work in some sort of enterprise common fashion. That makes that job a lot harder, so you'll need more people. So that's why you need to know that. And then you need a capability model. And that's really, you should have one. If you don't have one, that's job number one, which is really, I sometimes call it a process model, but it basically decomposes all business capabilities of your company into a structure. So finance, manufacturing, HR, and whatever. It has different levels. We'll stay at a high level for the scoping exercise, but you can actually drill into deeper levels to get more detail. But you need a description of what your company does in some structured model. That's an important component, and if you don't have that, I'll show one later, a sample. That's job number one, to get a capability model done. Then on the operating model side, which I won't go in as much, you definitely have to define your services. So depending on what you do, that might change, again, your team structure and what you need in terms of people to be successful. So by that I mean, what I always call critical services is early on, when ideas get formed, when before a big transformation takes off, you have to figure out what exactly you're going to do. Then you have to create a proposal of what will it take to do it, and you have to get some high-level solutions to figure out what will it cost to then actually execute this business transformation. Those phases, for example, are critical for architects to be in. And then later, when you execute, maybe you don't need architects, but some companies like to have the architects continue through it, or at least maybe through the early phases when, before I'd call it the concrete dries on the design, or maybe they want consultants architects to be engaged for design reviews. All those things are different services. Which ones are you going to do? Are you going to do all of them? The first one that I described, the early engagement and figuring out what to do and sending the project in the right direction, or the program, that to me is the most critical. You don't want to miss out on that one. But the other ones, do you really want to do those? Do you have the bandwidth to do those? Is that where you add the most value? Or if you work at the beginning with the execution team and you set people on the right way, then can they just execute? Why do the architects still need to be engaged? Is that really worth their time in terms of return for investment you're making? So obviously that's the long examples of services. Services are, do I run an architecture review board? And so on. I create architecture standards. I have to document those somehow. That's all work. So you need to understand what work you want to do and what you don't want to do. Then there's the engagement model, which is critical. How will you actually engage with your fellow IT colleagues and the business, right? Do you have several divisions with group CIOs? Do you have formal engagement managers that you should be working with to get engaged in the projects? When do you get engaged in the projects? What projects to get engaged in? Do you need to get engaged in every project? No. You want to get engaged in the big ones that really impact your architecture. So again, you need to understand your engagement model, which again, if you get engaged in everything, you need more people. I advise against that. Keep it simple and focus on the most strategic things. But again, you need to define this, which then helps you figure out what kind of team you need. And then there's governance, my least favorite word, but in there I would lump everything from, are you going to define the standards for the company in terms of patterns for integrations, standard way to do security? Are you going to create the security standards? Is that your team going to do that, or some other team? And then governance obviously is things like one of my other topics you can read around is what I think an architecture review board should be. But you got to figure out what kind of governance processes you're putting in place, and what kind of things do you have to create to be able to govern. That again requires horsepower, people to be able to do that, right? So if you take all those things, then you can figure out the org and people that you need. One thing that I'll stress here also is all of this what you should do up front, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier. I took a thick pen, didn't I? Let's take a thinner pen. This, what's your EA mission? Slash objective. What do you want to accomplish as EA? That's the overall guidance you need to have to then figure out these parts. So sit back, figure out with your CIO and other business stakeholders, what do you really want enterprise architectures to do? What is it that it would add the most value? And you want to really focus on that most value and so on, because if you do this and then you realize what kind of people you need down here, you need some pretty heavy hitters from your company, right? And you don't want to waste their time on lower priority items. So figuring out what to do with EA is pretty darn important, because your team is going to have some pretty talented people on it, and the fight for talent is pretty high. So you really want to make sure you're using these people on high priority things. So think about the EA mission, the objective, and then around that, figure out scope, operating model, and then the org and people needed to execute that will fall in place. And these all hang together. I'll give one more example. So I'll talk a little bit about org and people. For example, the company structure, if you're very decentralized, that might impact how many people you need, right? And it might be that in certain areas you are very centralized. If you're very centralized, you might need less people because it's easier to, I'll use the term herd the cats, right? The hard part about an enterprise architecture is to do things at the enterprise level. If it's already a centralized function, it's already being executed at enterprise level. So again, an enterprise architect can definitely add value to make those enterprise processes as solid and as good as possible, and to work with the related processes, which I think is the most important part. But it's not nearly as hard as if you're totally decentralized. Everybody gets to do their own thing in that process area they want by division, business unit, whatever way you're structured. And now you got to convince everybody to maybe work something at an enterprise level because it's better for the company. Well, that's a lot harder to do if things are decentralized. Okay, enough about this slide, and I'll move to the next. Okay, company priorities. So as I said, saw earlier here, I'm going to dive into these three areas in more detail around the scope. So company priorities. So just start jotting them down. So is there a big push to grow through acquisitions? I don't know how to write acquisition. I am German, sorry. Is it that you really want to look at operating effectiveness? Which the focus is, okay, we buy stuff, we make stuff, we sell stuff, and then we account for it. Okay, so just pure traditional operating efficiencies. Is it that you have new product offerings through digital services? Now is it digital services that your team should be focusing on, because that is where the future as a company is. That's where the biggest change is. That's where the biggest unknown architectures exist. Could be. Are we moving from product sales to some sort of subscription / services sales? So, are we not, selling you a lawnmower, but we're going to charge you, we get you the lawnmower. The lawnmower records how much grass it cuts, and you pay by how much grass you're cutting. Very different model. What does that mean for your business? So, again, could mean very new architectures, very new ways of doing business. Maybe that's what you want the team to focus on. Maybe you're really big in outsourcing commodity processes, and that's a big thing for the next 3 years in your company. Okay, maybe having skills in how to do that is important. And which processes are those? Are those just certain ones like finance, HR, purchasing? What are they? So again, jot these down so you know, okay, these are, and then say, you know what, this, and this are the big things for the next 5 years or so. Things change, so don't look too far in the future. That should tell you something about, okay, these are areas and they will equate to capabilities that your team needs to have. And then there are areas that are not covered by these things. Well, those are things you say no to. Okay, so jot these down. We'll come back to them later. Okay, next thing then is here I can use the black pen. What's the company structure? Are there, like I said earlier, are there multiple divisions? Are they? Is there some sort of divisional economy? Or more of a decentralized operating? How do decision rights work here? What's the process rigor in your company? How complex is your company? Okay, all these things you can tell down here. B's very much a oof. Okay, if we're not very process oriented and we're complex, oof, I probably need a bit more horsepower to get stuff done at an enterprise level. Maybe on the scope side, I hone into something more specific so I don't need to hire an army, because as you can look at some of my other posts or blogs that I have, I really believe enterprise architecture should be a lean, mean, small team. Obviously, if you have multiple divisions and they each have division autonomy for decision making, well, again, getting something at the enterprise level done is a lot harder. So you probably need, per enterprise architect, more horsepower to get that done. It's just not as easy as if you're centralized and the central authority gets to make the decisions. You have huge process rigor. Once the decision is made, everybody follows it. Everybody's very process oriented. Yes, this is how I do my work from today to tomorrow. I'm going to switch doing my work this way. No arguments. Well, life's a lot easier. You don't need as many people. And then you mentioned here, you see here that I've got two columns, business and IT. And it's pretty important because the way you work with a business and what you might offer is very important because of the way IT operates. I'll get into why. So first you want to ask yourself, what is IT? Now in the digital world, a lot of the digital services get developed from either a chief digital officer or someone in the business, and IT actually doesn't have that much to do with it. Some companies they do, some companies it's a mixture. What do you call IT? And where, if you are working in the IT realm as EA, another topic we can talk about a lot, but where are you and who might you have to partner with? Because if you only have influence over what you call traditional IT but not the other things, how do you partner with the other things to still get a holistic enterprise picture where your accountabilities overlap with their accountabilities or they're dependent on each other? Centralized versus decentralized, again, an important point. Oh, that's horrible writing. I shouldn't even try that. And that's again here. I mean, this to me is critical. So very often I see in IT organization, the tech stack's very centralized. The business doesn't care so much about what infrastructure you use. So it's centralized. Do you really then need an enterprise architect in your team to tell that other central team what to do? Infrastructure is a little independent from other things. They can, obviously you need people working with them, but do you really need an enterprise architect in there, or is there 1-2 people in that team that your enterprise architecture team works with for the infrastructure needs to be able to do a good proposal or something for a transformation for the business? So again, if it's already centralized, And it's something that you don't need 100% of the time for every project, and even in a project you don't need it that often. Is it better if those people actually aren't in EA? Something to think about. Again, process rigor is important because, again, here, if your company, just about what I just talked about, if your company is not very process, or your IT organization, sorry, is not very process rigorous, and you don't have these architects actually in EA, but you need their help, now suddenly personal priorities become, if it's not, people aren't like, hey, this is the process, this is the way it works. If it's a high priority project, it doesn't matter whose it is, and EA is engaged, and EA needs an infrastructure guru, that person shows up. Not, oh, I have these other priorities, let's have a discussion on what is more important. No, 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 no. There's a predefined rules of the road, and people follow them. Right? It makes a huge difference in how you might want to structure your team. If you have very good process rigor, it's a lot easier to have this virtual, or whatever you want to call it, where EAs work in other teams potentially, or matrix architects, whatever you want to call them, and they come together for these programs and help EA out for those times when they need them, but they don't need them 100% of the time. If you don't have this process rigor, that's pretty hard to pull off. The governance model, how do you make decisions? Reputation, influence of right? If IT is very much accepted their opinion and it's very clear what they influence or not, again, that takes a little bit churn out, right? It makes it a little bit easier. So knowing all these things then help you when you put all these puzzle pieces together. It helps you kind of balance, okay, I know I'm not going to have an army. You have some influence how big your team's going to be. But again, you start thinking about how much scope should I really take on, and making sure your people work on the scope that's of the highest priority. So there's a balancing act, and this helps you, again, this information helps you to structure that, but later also helps you to the way you want to structure the team. Okay. If you look at this, as I mentioned earlier, capability model. Here's a sample one, so you can call it process model, you can call it whatever. This is the high level ones. They happen to broke it up by commercial, supply chain, back office is the names they're calling it here. And then they have this kind of reporting side over here, you see, which is also a capability area that kind of broke it out. And you might, and you see a different sub capabilities or processes. And within financial control, financial planning, taxation, there might be more processes. But what you want to start doing is going, okay, do I really need to cover all these? Maybe you go, you know what? Legal? Do I care? Is it so horrible if legal doesn't have the best systems? Okay, if I'm working for a law firm, it'd be a problem. But if you're working for a regular company, really, is it so important? Right? Investor relations? Do I care? Do I need enterprise architecture involved in it? Maybe even probably people will start wondering, I might cross out this whole row of human resources. Will it really make a difference if the systems are better or not? And it's so much in a different area than maybe your main business. Does it matter? So again, start going through and say, you know what? I think I'm not going to operate there. Now, you could take the approach, I want to operate everywhere, and then see if it doesn't fit. But I would really think about, what is my mission? What are the most important things? So, for example, earlier we talked about, what if these operating processes around buy, make, sell, distribute, account for are the ones that are most important? Well, then, okay, then yeah, HR doesn't matter. Oh, by the way, IT doesn't matter. I know people always look at me funny when I say that. Well, IT here means the processes of IT, right? Is it really that important for you to fine-tune the processes of IT with an enterprise architect? Or is it more important you look at, if IT is a centralized organization, it's got people already worrying about that, will enterprise architecture make such a difference? Or is it better for you to look at the buy, sell, make kind of functions? Yeah, maybe IT falls out. Okay, so this helps you then using this capability model to say, okay, what do I need, what do I not need? So again, the way to actually do that then is, here is the EA impact matrix that I talked about earlier. So again, let me change color to something lighter. So up here is like what the business wants to influence times number of business units or divisions. Okay, don't make this time relative, but just as this increases, you're going to plot things more up here, and then centralized versus decentralized IT. Okay. So again, if you're, you can then plot this here. If, let's say, IT, like I mentioned earlier, is very French centralized finance, but maybe sales is very decentralized, and the business really cares about it and wants to influence it, and it's a priority of the business. And then maybe manufacturing is over here somewhere. Okay, then you go, you know what? Maybe you plot your process areas here and you go, okay, I'm going to focus on the ones that land in here. And you just keep on plotting. Maybe purchasing is somewhere here on the border. And you start going, okay, that's the area I need capability of people in, because that's where the biggest focus of the company is. And it's decentralized, as in it's not as enterprise common. When enterprise architecture, the whole idea is to get enterprise synergies out of things. So it's going to be harder to work these teams versus a local IT team doing it. Okay, maybe that's where enterprise architecture needs to be. So again, you could use this to figure out, okay, what are the areas within your process model that I should really work in as my scope, taking all these other things here into account. Okay, so that's what this does, and then you land now that you know what capability areas you will focus on. Now you can go and start thinking about the team you need. What are the processes, the services to do that? So again, earlier we talked about maybe mergers and acquisitions. That might totally is, if that's your biggest thing, and the way you do mergers and acquisitions is just actually to consolidate the back functions into a consistent way into this acquiring company. By that I mean actually your IT systems like email, things like that, collaboration tools, security, blah blah blah. And there's only certain things that and the rest you kind of leave them as independent. Well, maybe those areas are suddenly really important, the business cares about, because that's how you do effective mergers and acquisitions. So again, use the data from before to think this through, and then that helps you structure where your what process area, what capability areas you'll cover. And so again, we talked about this area here. Then start thinking about, okay, to cover that scope and what I'm trying to do as a mission and the priorities of the companies. Priority. What services do I need to offer? How am I, how does the company structure work and so on? How do I have to create my engagement model to do that well? And how do I govern so that actually these objectives that I'm trying to do here and here do happen? And like I say, once you figure that out, you know your scope, now you can put the people you need together. And these people very often will be people, as I mentioned earlier, that already exist. And then you need to work with your CIO to make sure you get those people. All this can really be done kind of on paper, right? In a relatively quick fashion. And the long time things that always happen are for other people to understand your engagement model. That takes a little bit longer. And often getting the people. But since you already have the people, you should be able to establish this effective architecture model with 90 days. Doesn't sound unreasonable to me at all. So that's it for today. I don't share questions that people have on my events and so on. I keep that all confidential, so no time for Q&A. And I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you very much.